We're doing a study from the book of Jude on relational leadership. Relational leadership. And it's amazing, but there are 5 different word pictures that we find here in Jude of bad leadership. And many times, the best way to learn what we should be doing is learn what we shouldn't be doing. And that's what Jude shows us. Here is the 3rd word picture that he gives us in verse 12. He says, they are late autumn trees. In other words, this is time of harvest. It's the autumn of the year. But they're without fruit. They are twice dead, pulled up by the roots. Now that is a very, very graphic picture. But oh my, it's the picture of some leaders that I have seen, leaders that I've known. This lesson I'm talking about influencing with values. Values are simply the things that are important to us in life. What is it that you would die for? I hope it's not everything, not trivia, but there should be some values in your life, things that are important enough that you would literally give your life for that. That's a value, and that's what we're talking about here. To lead with values, to influence with values. See, leadership comes back to character, to who we are, our integrity. Christian leadership, it's about this trust between leaders and followers, where commitments flow out of our character, Now, I understand that everybody has character. Some people are characters. But good characters will produce good fruit. Or another way of saying it is good roots produce good fruit. And it's impossible to produce good fruit unless you have good roots. Because it's the roots that feed the branches that produce the fruit. And so this is what we're talking about in influencing with values. Now, I want to use an illustration here from the life of the Apostle Paul. It's classic when you start talking about character. And it's the church at Colossae, the Colossian church. The Colossian church was a community of character. In other words, in Colossians 3 and 11, he talks about Jews and Gentiles. He talks about slave owners and slaves. He talks about all this diversity. This is the definition of what Christian community is all about. It's a diversity, and learning how to accept one another and appreciate one another, even though we are different. Being different. Diversity. It will bring differences of opinion. Yes, diversity. It will produce conflict. In fact, the truth of it is, conflict is a necessary byproduct of Christian community. If you don't have disagreement, one man said, if there's 2 people that always agree on everything, one of them is unnecessary. There's a lot of truth in that because we learn from one another. We can see things they can't see, and they can see things we don't see. And so we help one another, we strengthen one another with our differences of opinion. One of the things we must learn if we're ever going to profit in life is we can disagree without being disagreeable. I wish everybody understood that. Now, how do we handle conflict? That's a good question, because in this diversity of Christian community, there's going to be the conflict. How do we handle it? First, develop an attitude of love for all relationships. In other words, learn to respect every person. It doesn't mean they're perfect, but neither are we. We learn from each other. So learn an attitude of love toward all relationships. It's more than a cliche. We're never going to help anyone that we don't love. Or another way of saying it, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. That's more than a cliche. That is truth. So learn to love everyone. Here's the second point. Care enough to lovingly confront. Oh, now, that's where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? That's where the rub comes in. That many times we're afraid to confront because what's going to happen to the relationship? If it's a good relationship, you will overcome. If it's a good relationship, you will learn from that experience, and the relationship literally will be strengthened by it. If conflict is going to destroy it, and I'm just talking about differences of opinion here, I'm not talking about gross sin. I'm just talking about the differences of ideas, the differences of opinion. If we can't learn to even talk and discuss these things without becoming disagreeable, then we're never going to accomplish very much in life. You've got to learn how to get along with other people. Loving confrontation holds people accountable to live out their convictions. I find it astonishing. People say that they are Christians, but they don't even believe the Bible. They say they are Christians, but they've never asked forgiveness. They say they're Christian, but they don't go to church. How confused can we be? All of these things are biblical values. And if they're not foundational within our lives, I'm afraid we're only kidding ourselves about being a Christian. Now, talking about this church at Colossae, Paul, and there was a very important man in the church. In fact, it's commonly believed that he was the father of the pastor. He probably owned the property where the church had met. His name was Philemon. Yes, the same Philemon that is in your Bible. He was a slave owner. Boy, that gives some people problems. A slave owner. But it was a cultural problem that he had inherited. I don't believe that he set out to become a slave owner. No, it was a part of that culture in which he lived. When you read the book of Philemon, one thing that immediately stands out, Paul cares about Philemon. He genuinely loves this man, and he identifies with Philemon's problem. Philemon had a slave that stole from him and then ran away. And so Paul relates to him. He identifies with him. Paul accepts Philemon's values. He says, I know you are a good man, and he that's begun a good work in you is going to perfect that unto the day of Christ. These are the words that he's saying. Here's another thing I see. Paul believes that Philemon will ultimately do the right thing. That he will do it because he is a good man. He is a true believer. And so he confronts him. Now notice this. Paul never uses his apostolic authority. This is the only way that so many people know how to confront. I'm right and you're wrong. So, no. Paul doesn't do that. He doesn't do that at all. He doesn't start commanding him. No. He takes the approach of a gentleman, and he approaches Philemon saying, I understand this is a difficult problem, but I know that you're even going to do more than I say. Oh, what gracious words that he's using here. Now notice something else that Paul does. Paul makes a personal investment in solving this problem. He's saying, whatever he owes you, put that on my account. I, Paul, will repay it. All right. And see, until we're willing to get involved, until we're willing to do what we can do to solve the problem. I've seen so many people, they talk the problem to death, but they never accomplish anything. Paul doesn't do that. Paul's attitude is, I will pay it. By him paying the debt means Onesimus is no longer a slave. He is now a free man. Paul ultimately holds Philemon accountable to live out his Christian walk. He says to him, I'm going to be released from prison in just a short time, and I've already requested. I've requested that they release me to come to Colossae because I'm going to be staying at your house. So get the guest room ready. Now what's he saying? He's making Philemon accountable. Because when Paul gets there, who's going to be the first person he's going to look around to see? Yes, this new believer named Onesimus, the runaway slave. How's Onesimus doing? Now, I say all of this because, don't you understand, that is exactly what Jesus Christ is going to do. He's coming back again, and he will hold us accountable. One of the first questions in the Bible is when Cain says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Yes, you are to a certain extent. Whatever you can do to help keep your brother, you're accountable for that. And God will hold you accountable for this. So this is what we call the fruit of a Christian community. A Christian community can handle it. They can deal with these thorny issues in life. They can deal with these difficult problems that society just writes it off because they don't have any good solutions. But that is not true with the gospel. With the gospel of Jesus Christ, God's grace is sufficient, and he will help us find a good answer to the problem that we face. Now let me talk about character. Character. At the core of becoming a leader is the need to connect one's voice with one's touch. Now let me repeat that again. It's a very important statement. At the core of becoming a good Christian leader, there is this need to connect your voice with your touch. Let me tell you a story. This is a story of a minister that he wrote concerning his own personal life and his family. His oldest daughter had married, and she and her husband were expecting their first baby. And she was coming along with the pregnancy, but one day her husband walked out on her and left her. It threw her into such stress that she gave premature birth to a baby, a preemie baby. And he said, I have been there by her side as a father, and I can't be her husband. I'm trying to help her, though. And he said, when the baby was born, they put it in an isolette. They had it under oxygen. They isolated the baby while its lungs are developing and such. And he said, the head nurse came and talked to me and said to me, sir, you are the baby's grandfather, but I am appointing you a surrogate father for this child. I want you to come to the hospital every day. Go in, scrub up, put on the gown and everything. Come in and sit beside the baby's isolette. And I want you to talk to the baby. And as you're talking to the baby, just slip your fingers in and just touch the baby's skin. Just lightly touch the baby. And then she said these words, I want this baby to identify your voice with your touch. This pastor said, suddenly, it wasn't the head nurse talking to me anymore. God was talking to me. That this is the problem that we have in our world. This is the problem that we have in our Christian communities. Is that so many times our voice does not match our touch. What we say is not what we do. And because of that, people become disillusioned. You can say what you want to say about all the millions of people that have dropped out of church, but a big portion of them have dropped out because they are disillusioned with life. They're disillusioned with church, that our talk does not match our touch. God help us to change that. Now, let me talk about another word, the word culture. Not only do we have character, but there's culture. See, over time, as you practice your Christian life, the Christian community develops an unconscious way of doing things. Culture is just basically, that's the way we do it here. It doesn't mean that it's superior to everybody else. No, but there's got to be certain rules that we operate by. And that's what culture is. Culture is the way that we do things. Culture has its own language. And until we understand the culture, we're not going to be very effective as leaders. And so we have character, we have culture, and then there's this third word. The third word is the word values. Values, as I said, values are the things which are important to us. For instance, someone has said, why do you count your money? Because it has value. That's why. You count it because it has value. And everything in your life that has value is the same way. You will count it. It's important to you. So we have our character, we have the culture, we have our values. Leadership is a relationship of character that shapes the culture. This is the reason why churches, Christian communities, take on the personality of the pastor, of the leader. I've seen it over and over and over again. I'll go into a congregation, and it's a warm, friendly congregation. I know that's the kind of pastor they have. I go into a congregation, oh my, they're such a loving congregation. I know that's the kind of leadership they have. Because this is where leadership has its greatest power, is the influence upon the culture. Leaders create the culture by their lifestyles. See, they say of teaching that more is caught than taught. Now, what do they mean by that? In other words, people are watching what you do. And if your words don't match up your actions, if your voice doesn't match your touch, then people are disillusioned with that. They back off from you. But when they find people of integrity, what you see is what you get. I mean, they're the real deal. It doesn't matter. 24/7, they're Christians. They live out their Christian life. Their followers learn more from watching them than they do by listening to them. I can remember a young deacon in the church that we pastored in Ohio, and he came to me one day and he was saying to me, Pastor, I so respect you. I've learned so many things from you. And immediately, being a teacher, I start thinking, what series of lessons, what did I teach? And then he went on to say, I've learned so much by watching you, by watching the way you respond when people mistreat you, by watching the way that you behave when you could behave badly, but you choose to be nice. He said, I've learned by watching you. And that is true of all of us. All of us. As they watch us, it influences their behavior or the culture. The culture shapes the behaviors of the people in that organization or in that Christian community. And this is where leadership has its greatest power, its greatest impact. It sets its atmosphere through its influence. Through its influence. That's good leadership. Now, let me discuss just a little bit about the conflict between culture and values, the differences. See, in this situation where you've got a runaway slave and you've got a slave master that was done wrong, how are you going to deal with this? Paul shows us the way to deal with it. Now, the tragedy is many of our churches today are filled with victims. Victims. People who are trapped between what their leaders say and what their leaders do. They say they believe something, but in reality, they live a different lifestyle. They don't live what they are preaching. And this is why I'm constantly telling young pastors, your greatest message is your life, the way that you live. Because we're called to model our faith to the Christian community. This is our greatest influence, is being the real thing. And as we model this, it helps people to understand there's someone they can trust. Now, because none of us are perfect, we have vulnerability. In fact, let me say just a few words about vision and values and vulnerability. Oh my. There can be no leadership without forgiveness. It's impossible. Why? Because we're not perfect, and every leader will make mistakes. Being a leader demands that we make decisions even when we don't know what to do. You have to make a choice. You have to make a decision. You can't just sit and watch and see what disaster is going to happen. No, you have to take the best information that you have, and you have to act upon that. Forgiveness is a prerequisite for empowerment. It's impossible for someone to lead without making mistakes. Now, of course, if they're continually making mistakes, then they're not learning anything, and they're just repeating the mistakes. That's not good leadership. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm simply saying that it doesn't matter who the leader is. There's only one that is perfect, and that is Jesus Christ. All the rest of us are learners. All the rest of us. But as we go through life, we should learn from those mistakes. As someone has well said, if the devil fools you, shame on the devil. If he fools you twice, shame on you. Oh, there's truth in that. Because you should learn from that mistake and not make that mistake anymore. But we must be willing to forgive, to show grace. This is one of the problems that happens for so many people in their marriages. They start counting up all the things that their spouse did wrong. The Bible says that is not walking in love, because love does not keep account of the things that were done wrong. You have to choose to forgive. Choose to forgive. And no one is going to be able to be empowered without giving them the freedom to fail. Think of the child for a moment that is learning to walk. Think of the way that we relate to them. We're encouraging them as they pull up and they're standing there looking like they're 10 foot tall. They're so proud of themselves. But no, we'll start saying, come on, come on, come on. You take a step, come on. And we know what's going to happen. They're going to take one or two steps, and then they're going to fall on their face. And we know that's going to happen, but we give them the freedom to fail, because we understand they're going to learn how to keep their balance. They're going to learn how to walk. They're not going to continue to just fall on their face. They will learn to walk. Now, what are we doing? We are empowering them to fail so that they can learn how to walk. The same is true in the Christian life. If we're going to live the Christian life to its fullest and be who God wants us to be, then we've got to show grace to one another. I want to close with this thought. Why should we be a desert when we could be a garden? In other words, some people choose to go it alone. They choose to isolate themselves, to withdraw from everybody else. That's a big mistake. Why? Because you will never be fruitful alone. You're never going to be able to accomplish your goals alone. The only way you're going to be able to do that is to learn to work together in harmony with other people. And when you learn to work with other people, you're no longer isolated like a desert. It becomes like a beautiful garden, a flower garden, or a garden of fruit, a garden of vegetables. It becomes a fruitful place. Now, why would anyone make that foolish decision and say, I'm going to be a desert. When you can be a garden, when you can be fruitful, when you can accomplish many things in life. The potential that God has put within you is wonderful, but you're never going to accomplish it alone. It's impossible. It cannot be done. In fact, the Bible warns us about this. The first thing that God said that was not good was, it is not good for man to dwell alone. We must learn to work together in harmony. And one of the ways we do this is by determining our values. What are the things that are important to us? What are the things that I believe so much I would be willing to give my life for that? Those are the things that we can build our lives upon. Those are the things that will influence others. And by influencing others, we begin to multiply ourselves to accomplish things which we could never accomplish alone. I challenge you. Don't die a desert when you could be a garden. Don't die alone when you could be a part of something that's bigger than yourself, that accomplishes great things for God. May God bless you on your Christian journey as you learn how to influence others with the things that are important to you.